The helicopter's roar faded into the blizzard, leaving me alone with the endless white. A gust of wind slammed into me, sharp enough to steal my breath. My parka, thick as it was, might as well have been paper. I pulled the hood tighter and forced my eyes open against the swirling snow to glimpse the orange buildings ahead. Buildings connected by covered walkways, all painted bright orange against the endless white landscape. The helicopter lifted off behind me, its rotor wash creating a temporary blizzard. I grabbed my duffel bag and trudged toward the main entrance where a figure waited, arms crossed against the cold. "Sergeant Dennis Barry, reporting for duty, ma'am," I said, standing at attention as best I could while balancing my bag. Commander Florence Hamilton nodded curtly. She was shorter than me, but carried herself with unmistakable authority. Her salt and pepper hair was cut in a practical bob that framed a face weathered by years in harsh conditions. "At ease, Sergeant. Let's get you inside before you freeze solid." The main door closed behind us with a heavy thunk, sealing out the howling wind. The interior was utilitarian but warm, a welcome change from the biting cold outside. The walls were lined with equipment lockers, safety notices, and topographical maps of the surrounding area. "This way to my office," Commander Hamilton said, not waiting to see if I followed. Her office was small but organized, with a desk covered in neatly arranged papers and a large monitor displaying weather patterns. She motioned for me to sit while she pulled a file from a drawer. "Your record is impressive, Sergeant. 8 years of service, specialized training in cold weather operations, excellent evaluations from your previous commanding officers." "Thank you, ma'am." She closed the file and leaned forward. "Let me be clear about something. This isn't a typical posting. The Arctic is unforgiving in ways that go beyond the cold. We maintain strict protocols here for everyone's safety." She opened another drawer and pulled out a laminated card, sliding it across the desk to me. "These are our 5 rules. Memorize them. Follow them without exception." I picked up the card and read, "Rule 1. Never leave the outpost alone. Rule 2. Never open for anyone knocking. Rule 3. Maintain radio contact at all times during exterior operations. Rule 4. Do not approach figures who shouldn't be there. Rule 5. Do not look out windows after midnight." I looked up, wondering if this was some kind of joke. "Ma'am, may I ask the reasoning behind these rules?" "They've kept us alive, Sergeant. That's all you need to know for now." She stood up. "Let's introduce you to the rest of the team." We walked through a series of corridors until we reached what appeared to be a common area with a small kitchen, a table, and some chairs. 2 men sat playing cards. "Gentlemen," Commander Hamilton called, "meet your new team member, Sergeant Dennis Barry." The stockier of the two jumped up with a wide grin. "Well, hot damn fresh meat," he extended his hand. "Corporal Nolan Banks at your service. Don't mind the commander's scary face. She's actually a teddy bear once you get past the grisly exterior." Commander Hamilton rolled her eyes, but didn't contradict him. The second man stood more slowly. He was taller and leaner, with light brown hair and pale blue eyes that seemed to look through rather than at me. "Private Jackson," he said quietly, briefly shaking my hand before letting go. "I'll leave you to get acquainted." Commander Hamilton said, "Banks, show Barry to his quarters and get him oriented on the daily schedule. I expect him fully operational by tomorrow morning." After she left, Nolan slapped me on the back. "Come on, I'll give you the grand tour of our frozen paradise." As we walked, Nolan kept up a steady stream of chatter in his Texan draw, pointing out different areas of the station. "This here's the communications room. Got to check in with HQ twice daily. That's the equipment bay. We maintain snowmobiles and other vehicles there. Kitchen's fully stocked. We rotate cooking duties. And here's where you'll be bunking." The room was small but functional. A bed, a desk, a locker, and a small window looking out onto the endless white landscape. Not exactly the Hilton, but it keeps the cold out. Nolan said, "Dinner's at 1-800. Don't be late. Jackson's cooking tonight, and while he ain't much for conversation, the man can make a mean chili. The first week passed in a blur of training and orientation. I learned the station's monitoring systems, practiced equipment checks, and studied weather pattern recognition. The work was straightforward, but crucial. We tracked atmospheric conditions, maintained the facility, and reported data back to military headquarters. Nolan was always ready with a joke or story, making even the most mundane tasks entertaining. Jackson remained quiet, speaking only when necessary, though I noticed his keen attention to detail during our shared duties. On my 5th night, Nolan and I were checking equipment in the storage bay when he suddenly turned serious. "You getting used to this place yet?" he asked, his usual smile fading. "I think so. The routines are pretty straightforward." He nodded slowly. "Just remember something. The Arctic plays tricks on people's minds." "What do you mean?" "The isolation, the constant darkness in winter, the endless white, it messes with your head. People start seeing things, hearing things that ain't really there." I raised an eyebrow. "Is this your way of hazing the new guy?" His smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe a little, but I'm also serious. Ask Jackson if you don't believe me." I laughed it off. "I've been through desert deployments where guys hallucinated from heat exhaustion. I think I can handle a little snow blindness." "Sure thing, tough guy," Nolan said, his usual cheerful tone returning. "Just don't say I didn't warn you." I dismissed his warning as typical veteran tone-comer teasing, the kind designed to keep rookies on edge. But on day 8, everything changed. Nolan and I were performing exterior checks on the weather monitoring equipment. The sky had been clear when we started, but Arctic weather was notoriously unpredictable. Within 20 minutes, the wind picked up dramatically and snow began falling heavily. "We should head back," I called over the increasingly loud wind. Nolan nodded, but then froze, staring past me into the swirling snow. "You see that?" he asked, his voice suddenly tense. I turned to look where he was pointing but saw nothing except white. "See what?" "There's someone out there," he said, taking a step forward. "That's impossible. It's just the snow playing tricks on your eyes." The wind howled louder, visibility dropping by the second. We were quickly being enveloped in a whiteout. "No, I saw someone walking away from the station," Nolan insisted, taking another step forward. I grabbed his arm. "We need to get back now. The storm's getting worse." He shook off my hand. "What if someone's lost out there?" "There's no one else out here, Nolan. We're the only team for 100 miles. But he wasn't listening anymore. He took another step forward, then another. "Nolan, stop!" I shouted, but my voice was swallowed by the wind. I started moving faster, heading away from the station. "Thanks, that's an order." I yelled as loudly as I could. For a moment he paused and looked back at me, snow collecting on his eyelashes. "I'll be right back. Just going to check it out." Then he turned and ran into the whiteout, quickly disappearing from view. I stood there for a moment, torn, between following him and following protocol. Rule 1 was clear: never leave the outpost alone. If I chased after him, we might both end up lost. With a sick feeling in my stomach, I turned and made my way back to the station using the guide rope we had set up earlier. I burst through the door, immediately reporting to Commander Hamilton what had happened. She mobilized immediately, ordering Jackson to prepare the emergency equipment while she contacted headquarters. The storm raged for hours, making any search impossible. We could only wait, monitoring the radio for any transmission from Nolan. None came. When the storm finally cleared the next morning, we organized search parties, sweeping outward from the station in a grid pattern. I led one team, while Commander Hamilton led another. We called Nolan's name until our voices grew following standard search-and-rescue protocols, but we found nothing. No tracks, no equipment, no sign that Corporal Nolan Banks had ever existed outside the walls of our station. He had vanished completely, leaving us with only questions and the howling Arctic wind. I spent the next 2 days trudging through snow at the search parties. Commander Bradley led most of them herself, dividing us into teams that worked in grid patterns extending outward from the station. The visibility had improved since the storm, but the landscape offered nothing but endless white in every direction. No tracks, no equipment, no sign that Nolan Banks had ever existed beyond 50 yards from the outpost. "This doesn't make sense," I said during our third sweep, my voice muffled by the thick scarf wrapped around my face. He couldn't have gotten far in that weather. Commander Bradley stopped walking and turned to face me. Her expression was unreadable. Behind her snow goggles, Buther posture had stiffened. "This is why we have rules, Barry," she said. Her tone wasn't angry, just matter of fact. Rule 1 exists for a reason. Never leave the outpost alone. I nodded, though the explanation didn't satisfy me. People didn't just vanish without a trace, even in Arctic conditions. There should have been something. A glove, a footprint, a sign of a struggle against the elements. When we returned to the station that evening, I found Jackson sitting alone in the common area, staring at the wall. He barely acknowledged me when I entered. "No luck?" he asked after several seconds. "Nothing?" I replied, removing my outer gear and hanging it by the door. "It's like he was never out there." Jackson nodded slowly. "That's so it goes." I wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his expression stopped me. Instead, I headed to the kitchen to make us both some coffee. The search would continue tomorrow, but I was already beginning to accept what Commander Bradley seemed to know from the start. We weren't going to find Nolan Banks. By the third day, headquarters ordered us to end the search. The official report listed Banks as missing, presumed dead due to extreme weather conditions. Life at the station was expected to continue as normal until a replacement arrived. 3 nights later, I was on watch duty in the communications room. The digital clock on the wall read 2:17 a.m. Commander Bradley and Jackson had both turned in hours ago, leaving me alone with the steady hum of equipment and occasional static from the radio. I was updating the hourly log when I heard it, a knocking at the main entrance. 3 distinct knocks, a pause, then 3 more. I froze, pen hovering above the paper. The station was miles from anywhere. No one should be outside at this hour in these temperatures. The knocking came again. 3 sharp raps evenly spaced. I stood up and moved toward the main corridor, stopping. To grab the flashlight from the desk. The knocking continued. 3 raps, pause, 3 more. As I made my way down the hallway, the sound echoed through the empty space, somehow both muffled and clear at the same time. As I approached the entrance, a voice called out from the other side of the door. "Hey, is anyone in there? It's freezing out here." I stopped cold. The voice was unmistakable. The same Texan draw, the same casual inflection. It was Nolan Banks. "Dennis, that you moving around in there? Come on, man, open up. I got lost in the storm, but I found my way back." My hand moved toward the lock mechanism. It made no sense, but it was him. It was Nolan's voice, clear as day. "Dennis." I jumped at the sound of Jackson's voice behind me. He stood at the end of the hallway in his standard-issue gray t-shirt and sweatpants, eyes wide with alarm. "What are you doing?" he asked, moving quickly toward me. "It's Banks," I said, gesturing toward the door. "He's out there." Jackson reached me just as my fingers touched the lock. He grabbed my arm and pulled it away. "Rule 2, he said quietly, pointing to the wall where Commander Bradley had posted the laminated card with the 5 rules. "Never open for anyone knocking." "But it's Banks," I argued, though I allowed Jackson to pull me back a few steps. "Listen to him, please, guys." The voice outside grew more desperate. "I can see the lights on. I know you're in there. My hands are freezing. I can't feel my toes anymore." Jackson's grip on my arm tightened. "We need to get Bradley. There's no time. I said he could freeze to death out there." "Dennis, buddy," the voice called again. "It's me, Nolan. I got turned around in the storm. But I'm back now. Just open the door. I looked at Jackson, whose face had gone completely pale. We can't just leave him out there. Think about it, Jackson whispered. Really, think, the search parties. Found nothing. Not a trace. How could he have survived 3 days out there? The temperatures at night dropped to 60. The knocking grew louder, more insistent. Guys, please, I'm dying out here. I hesitated, torn between protocol and what seemed like the obvious humanitarian choice. Jackson used my moment of indecision to pull me further from the door back toward the communications room. The rules keep us alive, he said. His voice was shaking. That's what Bradley always says. For the next hour, we sat in the communications room, listening as the voice that sounded exactly like Nolan Banks cycled through pleas, reasoning, and eventually anger. I thought we were friends, Dennis. How can you leave me out here? I'd never do this to you. This is inhumane. You're going to let me die out here. Open the goddamn door. I know you can hear me. As I listened, something began to bother me. Despite all his desperate pleas and accusations, the voice never mentioned anything personal. Nothing about Texas, his family, or any of the stories he'd shared during our short time together. Nothing about our conversation in the storage bay about Arctic hallucinations. Nothing that only the real Nolan Banks would know. Eventually, the voice fell silent. Jackson and I sat without speaking until Commander Bradley found us there at 5 a.m., still staring at the radio equipment, though neither Ophis had touched it for hours. When we told her what happened, she simply nodded and instructed us to note it in the log. She didn't seem surprised. "Check outside," she ordered. "Full daylight only." When morning came, I suited up and stepped outside with Jackson. The sun was barely over the horizon, casting long blue shadows across the snow. We examined the area around the entrance carefully. There were no footprints, no signs that anyone had been at the door. The pristine snow lay undisturbed in every direction. "I don't understand," I said, crouching down to look more closely at the ground beneath the entry. He was here. We both heard him. Jackson said nothing, just stared out at the empty white landscape, with those pale blue eyes of his. A week passed without further incident. The station fell into a quiet rhythm. Just the three of us maintaining the systems, running the tests, sending reports. Then the transport helicopter arrived with our new team member. Sergeant Jasper Robertson stepped off the helicopter with a single duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He was about my height, with black hair cut precisely to regulation length and an athletic build. He greeted Commander Bradley with a crisp salute before being escorted inside. During his orientation, I noticed Robertson's eyes narrow when Bradley presented him with the laminated card of rules. He accepted it with a polite, "Yes, ma'am." But there was something in his expression. A slight curl at the corner of his mouth, a dismissive glance at the card before pocketing it. Later, as I showed him the equipment bay, he asked, "So, what's with all these rules?" "Bit excessive for a research station, isn't it? They keep us alive," I repeated Bradley's words, feeling their weight, especially Rule 1 and 2. "Right," he said, nodding with exaggerated seriousness. "Never leave alone, never open for knocking." "Very spooky," he chuckled. "Military loves its protocols, huh? Even in the middle of nowhere." I stopped checking inventory and turned to face him directly. Banks thought it was funny, too. Now he's gone. Robertson's smile faded slightly, but the skepticism remained in his eyes. "Look, I'm sorry about what happened to your friend, but people get lost in Arctic conditions all the time. It's not some mystery that needs rules written on a card." I didn't argue. There was no way to explain what we'd heard that night. The voice, that was Nolan's, but somehow not Nolan's, without sounding crazy. Instead, I finished showing him around the station and left him to settle into Banks's old quarters. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about Robertson's reaction. to the rules. His skepticism reminded me of my own initial response, reasonable doubt from a rational mind. But after what had happened with Banks, after hearing that voice at the door, I knew better now. The rules weren't suggestions or overcautious guidelines. They were survival. I kept a close eye on Jasper during our first patrol together. The weather had cleared enough to perform routine maintenance on the exterior sensors. Nothing complicated, just standard checks to make sure the equipment hadn't been damaged in the recent storm. We trudged through the snow in full cold weather gear, our breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Radio check, Robertson," I said as we approached the first sensor array about 50 yards from the main entrance. Jasper nodded but didn't respond, verbally. I watched as he raked down to his belt and switched his radio completely off. "What are you doing?" I asked, pointing at his radio. "Rule 3, we need to maintain radio contact during all exterior operations." He looked at me with that same dismissive expression he'd worn when Commander Bradley had given him the rules card. "Come on, Barry. We're literally 20 steps from the door. Who are we going to call?" "Each other." "That's not the point," I said. "The rules are there for a reason. Yeah, to keep use in line with unnecessary protocols." He turned away and continued walking toward the sensor array. "I'll turn it back on if we go further out." I wanted to argue more, but decided it wasn't worth escalating the situation. We were close to the station, and I could still see Commander. Bradley through the main window monitoring our progress. I'd mention it to her later. The maintenance itself was straightforward, checking connections, clearing snow buildup, and confirming power levels. Jasper worked efficiently, but remained unusually quiet. When we finished and headed back inside, I noticed something had changed in his demeanor. The cocky skepticism was gone, replaced by a distant stare. "Everything okay?" I asked as we removed our gear in the equipment bay. He looked at me with a slight delay, like my words had to travel a great distance to reach him. "Fine," he said finally, "just cold." During dinner that evening, Jasper barely touched his food. He kept glancing toward the windows, though they were covered as required after dark. When I tried to engage him in conversation about his previous assignments, he gave only one-word answers, his attention clearly elsewhere. "You feeling all right, Robertson?" Commander Bradley asked, noticing his behavior. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Later, I found Jackson in the communications room and mentioned what had happened. "He switched off his radio?" Jackson asked, his pale blue eyes widening slightly. "Yeah." "Didn't see,"